everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My Ed Tech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful morning here in South Texas, and hopefully, wherever it is that you are joining us from, anywhere in the world, hopefully, you are having a wonderful day. As always, thank you so much for making us part of your day. Definitely appreciate all the likes, shares, follows, retweets, guys. You guys are all amazing. Thank you so much for all the love that you have for our show. As you know, our mission is to connect educators and creators one show at a time with amazing conversations of things that are relevant to our education space. And today I am excited to welcome one of my favorite creators that I started following on TikTok for a while. And she is also in higher ed. So we're definitely going to get a great perspective as to how she sees AI here in our education landscape. So I would love to welcome to the show Elise Victor. Elise, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be on the show.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I know that you are very busy. Also, obviously, you're teaching at UNT, and then, of course, you've got other things that are going on. And, of course, your TikTok channel, which is so informative, so amazing. And I absolutely love how much time you invest in it and sharing your experience and answering people's questions and going through, just even set up this, and do that. Thank you so much for what you do because that really helps a lot of educators and a lot of professors that are out there in the higher ed space also understand what is happening. So I'm really excited to dive in into this conversation with you. As you know, I am in the K to 12 space, but I am always looking to learn what the challenges are, the observations, or what the reactions are from the higher ed space. So I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on that. But before we get started, as you know, anybody that I do invite on the show is I liken them to that superhero because I look up to the work that they're doing. And as we know, every superhero has an origin story. So I would love for you to share your origin story. And I always like to start off with asking if education where you're at now is something that you thought you would be going into, or was this something that you came into a little later in life?
Sure. So it's interesting. I actually had thought that I was going to go into education early on, and I came from a family of educators. So my grandmother was an English teacher. She went to Berkeley and she was a librarian. And my grandfather was a math teacher and then later taught high school and then went to community college. And so I spent a lot of time with them when I was young and I watched them, and they were really pivotal as far as kind of shaping my my mind as a child. And so I thought I was going to go into education, and I actually went into the AmeriCorps program as a reading tutor, kind of out of high school, and then just due to sort of what I think happens to a lot of people is, needing to financially support myself and thinking that there were, education may not have been able to provide that. I went more of a business route. And so my undergraduate degree was in business. And then I went on to get a master's in healthcare administration and accounting, and had a series of jobs in the corporate world, from hedge funds to consulting. And I did a lot of that for a number of years. I lived in New York, and I didn't find it as rewarding as I did with education and just working with people. And so I actually pivoted more towards a healthcare role, but really found myself coming full circle and started my doctoral studies at the University of North Texas in 2016 and focused in information science, and then have been able to, I finished and have been teaching there part-time since.
Oh, wow, that is wonderful. And I love your background. See, but in a way, it's very similar to mine, where I did work in marketing and I worked in sales prior to coming into education. And you know what? What resonates with me is what you mentioned, kind of like you thought that, it didn't kind of fulfill you in that sense because you loved working with, with people and doing all of that. And for me, when I came into education later on, that's really where my passion was, is just to be working with students and working with educators, that hands-on approach, and it was really great. So yeah, that really resonates with me. Now talk to us a little bit about your coursework. And so was this something that you thought about when you were going to work on your PhD? Was this something that you had already known that you wanted to go into, or how did that interest develop for you to receive your PhD in information science?
So it actually evolved from the healthcare space. So I looked at UNT and the programs that were available at that time, and within the information science department, they had health informatics, a kind of a sub. Discipline, and that was really aligned with what I was doing and where I was at the time. As I continued to take classes, and I got to the point of my dissertation, I actually had three topics that I was interested in, and one was AI, cybersecurity, and then also looking at the legal field and some data analysis around that. And I actually ended up picking the legal one. And you and I had talked about kind of wanting to introduce other things. And I really wanted to go lean more towards AI, but I'd already started down the path of the research. And so I didn't want to change and do a lot of rework. But what I did was, during the time I was finishing my dissertation, I started to get really involved in a lot of aspects of AI, more AI in medicine. But I, was working with, the ABAIM is a board certification program for people that work in artificial intelligence in medicine. So really looking at how, AI startups can influence the space, what they're doing, the impact that it has on, different health systems. So that was my kind of entry point into AI, was really the medicine piece. But as my interests evolved and things happened, it really came to be more focused on sort of education and a broader, I think, look, I would say, at business and the use of artificial intelligence, since I did have a strong business background. So I started to have contacts that I'd had previously kind of asking me with their company and what they could do, and how, it really evolved to that. And now I'm sort of in both spaces, I would say, because I have people that I'm working with that are more like a business consulting type of a role in AI, but then I also have my foot in education, and I'm really focused on that as well. So I feel like I'm kind of getting all of it at once, and everything's moving so fast in AI that yeah, it's quite a bit.
No, I completely agree with you. Everything from like December, late November, December on has just been all about that. And what happened is, this was just something that in February I went to one of our annual tech conferences that was held here in San Antonio, and it was just barely getting a little bit of a buzz, and then all of a sudden it just kind of blew up in our education space. But what I love that you mentioned is just having those perspectives as to, yeah, even though I work in the K-12 space, the being a student currently right now in higher ed, that I also want to learn that perspective as far as what professors are seeing, what they're doing, what their thoughts are, as we've had various conversations here also as well, and we've had some great guests. But also in the business side of it, definitely seeing just the huge impact that this can have in the creator space as well. So I'm just really excited about all of these changes. But as we know, with rapid change, there are some fears that a lot of people may feel, especially people that have been in these particular spaces, that are kind of stuck in the "this is the way we've always done it" kind of routine, and something that like AI that comes around to kind of disrupt the way things are usually done can really cause just some fear. So I would love to ask you, through your experience right now that you currently have at UNT and teaching some of the courses, has the university come up with a plan, or do they have anything that it has been set as far as the use of AI within the organization?
So it's interesting that you say that. So we have not had specific guidance, and I think a lot of what happens in higher ed is that teachers really are autonomous, and they sort of run their courses and their classrooms as they want to, and we have not, as educators, had any guidance in terms of these are the allowed tools, these aren't, any of that. It's really whatever you allow in your classroom is what what it is. With that said, also at a department level, I have not heard any terms as far as the use of ChatGPT, and not just as far as an education tool, but also from the standpoint of students using AI tools and kind of where that fits in with our academic policies and plagiarism and all of that stuff. There was actually no guidance. So really, and we're a very large school. So for that, I think there's probably a lot of confusion. There are teachers that I feel are just not acknowledging this at this point. They're just kind of operating the way that they have. There are some that I think are concerned. I've had conversations with people outside of the university that have also been working with uh, teachers and like technical people in higher ed. And it was one thing that stuck out to me was I spoke with someone that has started an AI detector company, and they're very focused on education. And this person told me that as he's having his conversations, a lot of what he's getting is just resistance or unreasonable, I guess, expectations as far as what the technology can do. So in particular, he said he spoke with a professor that, has been teaching for 30 some years and said, I just want the detector to tell me what chat GPT prompt the student put in. And I want that, like, I want that level of information. And so he's trying to have this conversation explaining that that's just not possible. Right. And there's this frustration. And so I think I would guess, and again, it's a guess, but that this is more prevalent in the higher ed space than K through 12. I think the adoption possibly may happen faster because they aren't, those teachers are not necessarily operating as autonomously as, um, you know, college professors may. And it's
Yeah.
probably easier to make some of the changes to adapt curriculum and teaching and all of that and integrate these tools than you would necessarily in a K through 12.
Yeah. No, and I agree. And so really what I do is I follow obviously your work that you do on your TikTok channel and everything that you share, but also like Stefan Bouchard and then Ethan Malik,
Mhm.
what they're doing and their guidance and just seeing how they're using and implementing these technologies into their classrooms and or into their settings. And one of the things too, like I mentioned in our organization, at least as far as my doctorate program, there was really no guidance at all. Like I mentioned to you in the pre-chat, just one of my professors said, hey, we know that this is out there. Should you submit something and we kind of have a question on it, we'll definitely meet with you, or things of that sort, and see what we can do just to kind of rewrite those things. But it just seems that the program chair has kind of actually in our discussion boards, everything is just asking like, how would this be done or used, or what are your thoughts? So I think they're open to the idea of kind of maybe changing things around as far as this is the way we've always done it approach. A couple of questions that I had Daniel Lopez, who has an amazing podcast too as well, and we were talking about the college essay being dead and the writing components and so on. And we were thinking, for myself, and I'm going to be open and honest. I've said I'm not a big fan of writing. I've never been a great writer. So sometimes when I think about writing assignments that are very long, I'm like, is this really like for knowledge, or is this for stamina? We can write 20 pages, or is this like you just really want to see my knowledge? Because we can, create a learning artifact, in a different way using different components. But as far as the writing is concerned, what are you seeing? Maybe if you can tell us about the AI detection tools. I know that you are very outspoken on that. And so I want to know just what you share on your TikTok channel and what you've seen. I know when Turnitin came out, I posted
Mhm.
on one of your posts that said, I tried it out and it didn't really work as well as at least they make it seem. And of course, it was
Right.
giving a lot of false positives. So what has been your experience with tools like that, like Turnitin or other AI detection tools?
So, well, first off, with Turnitin, so they went live a couple of weeks ago, and I, as an instructor, didn't have that information ahead of time. So I feel like probably part of what's happening is there's a communication gap, because I would have loved to be able to tell my students, this is going live, this is a feature. And early on in the semester, I did. speak with them about just generative AI, ChatGPT in general. And then beyond that, I didn't have a conversation so until after it went live. And my involvement is I've really been testing all of the detect not all of them, but a large the most some of the most popular ones. I'd say like the top 8, along with Turnitin with work that the only work that I've tested that I know is human generated is my own because I know that, and I just I don't have other work I'm finding and running through. But I've heard some anecdotal stuff about the Constitution's gone through this one, and it's was came back at supposedly some percent of AI. So there definitely is that element, right? The false positives. I've experienced it in certain detectors with my own work, and so I my concern is that a company like Turnitin that's now gone live with 2 million users is going to be slower moving than these smaller companies that are out there trying to participate in the cat and mouse game and come up with ways to circumvent the detectors. And from what I've seen, that those smaller, nimble companies with open source technology, just fast moving elements of people and all of that, they're going to be able to get around whatever detectors there are. I'm just it's just a matter of time. And even if Turnitin updates things or, the other detectors, it's going to be this continual and ongoing thing. And so with that said, I think where I'm coming from is that the approach in education shouldn't just be here's the detector, okay, well now you're in trouble and then go write your essay, because at the end of the day, are we really learning? What are we doing? What about the false positive? There's so many questions that I think we need to change. We, like you alluded to, is we need to look at what assignments we're giving. What is the end goal, right? Is it to develop critical thinking skills? Is it to learn proper syntax? What is the class? What is the context? And then I think it puts a lot back on the educator to have to be familiar with the technology, understand it, think about how we can work alongside it. And that's a lot of work, right? If you've been teaching a course a certain way for a number of years, it requires a whole new way of thinking. So I think that's some of the challenges out there. But I know I've gone kind of in a different direction. But my point is, I think the AI detection, it it is like a tool in the educator's toolbox that might help to inform them of a red flag. Maybe this student's not submitting their own work, and then that's a broader conversation to have. Um, and that's about it. That's probably where it ends. And I think really solving the problem is to come up with different ways to teach students.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I do find interesting, Elise, is that you mentioned. I can see this in the K-12 space being where teachers are either self-contained, well, they'll only have those 30 students, but there are certain districts or certain schools that departmentalize where you're the science teacher, science and social studies, reading, language arts, and so on. So, and then of course they do like a three-way rotation. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if there's something like this, you've got 180 students that are submitting, things to you, and then now you're being a private eye or a sleuth here, trying to see who did use Chat GPT, and now you have to chase them and say, okay, now I need to talk to you, and setting up meetings and making those phone calls, and it just kind of adds more to the plate. So I think, like you mentioned, maybe just kind of thinking of what the end goal is as far as what the learning that needs to take place is, and make just adjustments according to that. And I absolutely agree that you mentioned, there are some teachers that have been doing things the same way for many years. I mean, I know teachers that still use note cards to teach citations, where there's extensions and websites that can give you your APA, MLA just by popping in the information, and it'll give you that information because I don't know, it's just like, oh, well, this is a skill that they need. I was like, I've never used that skill in my master's or even now, because I have the ability to pop in information into a citation machine that'll go ahead and give me my citations correctly.
Right.
So it's just kind of those things like, let's reevaluate what the goal is, how we can go ahead and see how this will move on into the future, and how we can still demonstrate the learning. And so I'm just always weary about that, because it's just so much, all those phone calls, referrals. Now I'm writing referrals because this student, there's no academic integrity, there's this. So how can we change those things and think about those things in a different way? So yeah. So tell me a little bit more. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the AI writers and yourself, on social media. So I want to ask, leading up to, of course, what your venture, where you will be starting up your company, the RAM.ai. But before we get into that, I just simply want to ask, as a, teaching professor there at UNT and going through this experience and your vast knowledge of AI and keeping up to date. What was the moment, or what was the one catalyst that inspired you to put yourself out on TikTok and, share your knowledge on social media?
I think I was just so enamored, I think with as a lot of people, with Chat GPT and the incredible, just change and power that this tool had. I mean, I'd been familiar with AI, but this was really the first kind of consumer facing tool we could get in and just see how generative AI works. It was incredible. And I think I was just so excited about that. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of research more on just Gen Z and TikTok. And so I thought, well, let me say, I have two middle school children that are on TikTok, and they said, "Mom, you are not allowed to be on TikTok." That they're completely mortified. And so I'd never had a TikTok account for years. And I thought, well, I just want to see, I'd love to kind of get the perspective of this generation. And that's where I initially came from, was just trying to sort of understand. I didn't go into it even thinking I was going to create content. I just kind of wanted to understand. And then that mirrored up with, ChatGPT, being used more widely, talked about. And I thought, well, why don't I just make a TikTok? Let's see what happens. And I didn't really go into it with any expectations. And then, people responded, and I said, oh, well, I'll just keep doing it. And, and I've actually really enjoyed it. And it's interesting because I have a lot of students that I know follow me because I talk about the AI detectors. And I think I have a following of people that are just, more interested in ChatGPT and AI. And so a little bit of a challenge is kind of balancing that as well. And I think a lot of students, they appreciate my content, but they still maybe aren't thinking, well, she's an educator, because I got a lot of messages where it's like, what can I use to get around this detector? And I have to respond saying, you need to speak with your teacher, and have that whole discussion. But they are hunting me down, like, I have a paper due in 3 days and I need to know how to avoid turn in. I was like, no, I can't help you with that. And I do talk about a lot about what doesn't work. And that's all I'm going to talk about. And I know that there are certain things that do work to get around detectors, but I'm not going to post a video and encourage students obviously to cheat. And part of why that wouldn't make sense, even if students come up with their hack in whatever it is, you're still risking. You don't know when the turned in algorithm changes. You don't know. And the reality is, if you're submitting work like that, it's not great anyway. And teachers that are familiar with the student and their writing, it's obvious. And so, when someone's going to make a habit of submitting AI written work, they're not on a good path anyway. So yeah, so that's sort of how it started, and kind of my perspective on that. And I find it's just kind of fun. It's just fun part of my day to make a TikTok. And uh, my kids have also accepted it, and they like some of my posts. And although my middle school son said, ever since I started liking your posts, all I get is Chat GPT stuff. And I said, well, that's how the algorithm works.
Well, let me ask you, from the perspective of your middle school age children, what are their thoughts on this technology? And of course, having someone like yourself at home that is very familiar with this, can I ask, did you have maybe a talk with them, or did you just say, hey, here's a tool that is out there, make sure we use it wisely? Or well, just, I want to know their perspective, because I don't get to, hang around with middle school age children. So I would love to know what their perspective is on AI.
So my son actually knew about ChatGPT before I did, and he has not. expressed kind of a real interest in it, I would say, and same with my daughter. So seventh grade son, eighth grade daughter. They don't seem really like they're understanding. You know, when you're very first using it, right? You may have very simple prompts and almost view it as, you know, like a different kind of a search engine or something. And I think that's where they are. And I've said, you know, I can show you, I can teach you things, and they're just like, no, mom, we don't want to do that. We're not interested. So that's really where they are. I know that they've said there are different students that they know of. There's some students a friend of mine who has children in another school, they're in the National Honor Society, and apparently like some students have wrote their essays using ChatGPT, and that's how she became familiar with it, and she's not in education. So yeah, I mean, I think there's just kind of an understanding that they have, but they're not really excited about using it at this point, which is fine.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but that's great feedback. I think I can see that also in maybe some educators, or actually more so in the non-education field. Because I mean, somebody like yourself that has your background, and of course working with technology, and that being your passion for myself, I'm like, man, this is a big game changer. I actually had a colleague of mine. We work in the same department, and he told me about his friend who shared, Chat GPT with somebody that is in not in education, and said, "Hey, look, let me show you what this does." And they're like, "Okay, like what's the big deal?" Like they didn't think it was a big deal. I'm thinking it's, obvious because they're not in our space. Like we're into the tech, we see the potential, but there are some people out there that are just like, like no big deal. So it's very interesting just to get those reactions, because I figured, for a lot of our students that do find this out, there's some students that will use it. And of course, there's always the one student says, "Hey, look what I found. Let me share with you what I found." And then all of a sudden that starts building up that, "Oh, look what we have, and look at what we know that the teacher doesn't know," kind of lure that you have. And then after a while, it's just kind of like, just kind of dies out and so on. So thank you so much for sharing that. So now I want to talk a little bit more about you here in your bio that you shared with me too. I know that you're currently working on an AI speaker series. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we build up into your upcoming venture? So tell us a little bit about that and how that came about, and what it is that people can expect from the AI speaker series.
So what I'm currently doing is it's more focused on the corporate side versus education at this point. And what I'm creating is a 6-part series for now this particular one's a private company. So this is one of the consulting jobs that I have, and it's really taking ChatGPT or AI from like A to Z, but for an audience that's not familiar with it. And it's 6 15-minute kind of courses. And I'm creating that training session. I'm also speaking with another. So they're mostly corporate, and it will be proprietary for them. But as I'm doing that, I'm also figuring out how I'm going to probably put on my website something similar where it's just, it's whether it's a course or a training, but really from start to finish of kind of chat GPT. Because I know when you go on social media or you're on LinkedIn and you get all these snippets of, how to prompt, how to do this. And I think having a cohesive, A to Z training that is available is that's what I'm working on. So at this point, with my kind of limited time, I'm doing the 6-part series for that organization, and they have 7,000 employees, and that's going to be their own content. But I am going to, in parallel, do something that would be sort of similar to that. I don't know if it'll be 6 that will be available, and then also part of what I'm where I'm positioning myself to is to be able to go into organizations, and if they need speaking or just somebody to engage their employees to discuss, ChatGPT in terms of where it is, how it might affect their organization. That is also something where I'm focused.
Oh, that's great. That is so good to hear. And especially with your, knowledge, your background, and your experience. That's wonderful. So I want to ask though, on your perspective too, I know we've been talking about K-12, we've been talking about higher ed, and I know you just mentioned the company that you are consulting for. So what has been, maybe not necessarily their perspective, but what you see right now in the business world, due to AI and all these generative technologies that are out there, that they're reaching out to you. What is their main, concern, or is it just like, hey, we just want more knowledge to use this, or how can this disrupt our industry? So can you tell us maybe a little bit about that?
Yeah, I found that the most frequent question is how could we integrate this into our current operations? What is it really going to do for us, right? Because they're seeing, they can gain efficiencies, they can do all this stuff. And the question is really, I think it's two things: is how would this work? And how much is it going to cost me? Is the two biggest things in terms of just what the impact is, cost benefit, and a genuine curiosity. I think that more so than at least from my experience, rather than worry about jobs and all that. The feedback that I'm getting, and I don't know if this is across the board, but it's just more how can we gain efficiencies and use this new tool and kind of evolve and stay ahead of the game. And so it's been pretty positive from that aspect too.
Oh, that's great. See, just to hear those things, because I know, like I said, with new technologies, very disruptive. A lot of people are like, wow, what's going on? You hear all the buzz, but that's great that they're interested in just, okay, what is it? How does it work? And then, of course, the return on investment on it. And more than anything, I think that I love the word that you use, the efficiencies, because even for in our space, I mean, I'm sure that you being in the higher ed space, and I know me being in the K-12 space, I have always tried to look for the best way to be as efficient as possible and to share those tools with teachers, and especially because they have so much on their plate, whether they're self-contained or departmentalized. There's a lot of those little menial tasks that can be taken care of with your tool, just like Chat GPT. So like I said, when we talked pre-chat, is like, if we can get a teacher just 10 additional minutes, 15 additional minutes, just to sit there and decompress at the end of the day, I think that's a win. And so that's what I'm always looking for when introducing new technology or new platforms. I don't want it to add more to the teacher's plate. I want to see what we can do to remove something from their plate. And of course, with so much that is happening out there in this space, we definitely can see, just a huge opportunity for those efficiencies pretty much in any sector. Um, from your experience, are there any kind of sectors that maybe that you have been either in contact with, whether it's business or non-business, that show a little bit more of, or maybe through your personal research studies, that maybe have a little bit more of that fear of like, oh, we might get replaced? What have you seen through your experience?
It seems like the two areas would be people, like copywriting, and in
Mhm.
the marketing space. And this is not from my this is more just kind of reading and
Mhm.
seeing, what people are talking about. And then the coding, the programming side is probably those are the two areas that seem to be, I guess, probably the most vocal and maybe the big most at threatened by the technology. That would
Okay.
be, but again, I haven't had personal, conversations. I just outside of all the social media through a friend, I know someone that does do copywriting in for medical content, and it really wasn't even a thought in her mind. And I wasn't going to suggest anything. It was in the flow of the conversation, but I found it interesting that, that's specifically what she does, and that there wasn't a concern as far as ChatGPT being a threat. And
Mhm.
I don't know. I think for copywriting specifically, and that it's going to evolve. I don't. I mean, you have a marketing background. I would think. I don't
Yeah.
think copywriting would go away, but I think it's going to change, right?
Yeah. No, for sure. Most definitely. That's one of the things. And even, for us as educators, even as content creators, with podcasting and, posting on social media and so on, I mean, we have to kind of even adapt to ourselves to the new technologies that are out there, and which make it a little bit more efficient for us. Because again, I've always been, I went from starting this podcast 3 years ago and editing one episode and taking me about 3 hours just to kind of release to now it's like 45 minutes, I'm done and I'm good. And I've got my clips for the rest of the week and I've got my copy for the rest of the week and I'm solid. And that really helps out a lot. So yeah, those efficiencies there really help out a lot, in the content creator side. And then of course with even with copy though, I think there maybe even just the adapting, because anybody can kind of go in here, but if you really don't know how to really formulate that prompt to give you what you need,
Mhm.
then you're going to have some issues there. So I think that's going to be a skill too that you definitely need to know how to get the best output. So maybe that might be just a way for them to adapt rather than, hey, I'm going to call myself a copywriter. I'll be like a prompt writer and do those things to get you the copy. But as we know, at least we've seen on several TikToks, we've seen so many people on social media that have, a plethora of prompts and they're out there sharing them for free. Or, obviously there's some that will charge for those things, but the information is out there. It's just a matter of sometimes, do I really want to research that information or do I just want to bring somebody on that's just going to focus on that and they can do the researching for me and we can continue. So I don't know, just some things there to think about too. And with the coding, I know with that we definitely need to have somebody still there to verify that the
Right.
code is going to run correctly and debug, because we can't always rely on what is out there on that output, because like you've mentioned on several and I love this that you mentioned on your TikToks, it's really just predicting,
Mhm.
just the next thing that is going to be coming. So, for a lot of, maybe that's a good thing to do right now, maybe just for that TikTok that you shared, but maybe for audience members that still may not be aware how TikTok works, if you can just give that little brief explanation that you did in your video, and I'll
Oh,
make sure
sure.
and post that on the show notes too as well.
Okay. So ChatGPT essentially it is a predictive model. So it will it's trained on a vast data set, as we know. And what happens is when someone puts a prompt in, and the example I used in TikTok, I think was write me a paragraph, a sentence about a dog, just a very generic prompt. It takes all of that information that it's ingested and it determines from a subset of information, I'll say, what it should respond to you as. So it's first going to say to think to itself, what is the first letter or first word that I'm going to answer this question with? So it takes the information about everything that's ingested about a dog or whatever your prompt or your sentence is, and then it gets the highest probability word first. So in that example, actually it was the word a dog is, maybe a man's best friend or whatever it was. And every word after A, the model will assign the highest predictable, the highest probability of that word occurring. So if A and then dog is second, right? So you'd have the probability of A occurring and then dog and then so on and so forth. So every word that occurs after is built upon the previous words. And the thing about that, so if you're using ChatGPT, that's really interesting is if you introduce the context. So you say, write a sentence about a dog and then some sort of additional context, you really kind of limit ChatGPT to a subset of the information that it contains within, its ChatGPT brain, I guess we'll call it, to provide you with that answer. Now, the more general you are with your prompt, it really has all access to all of the information. So if you're looking for something very specific, you will want to provide that context. So I think what I explained in the TikTok is when you are very general, I know people have probably experienced putting in a prompt and getting the same exact prompt, two different answers. So I wanted to explain that because someone would say, well, if it's predictable and that's the way it works, you should always get the same answer, which is not true, because what will happen is ChatGPT will assign sort of a context to your prompt if you don't do that yourself. And so within that, maybe the sentence that it selects in one instance would be different, although it still uses that probability and predictability to continue and to write all of the response. It may not initially suggest the same context if you haven't provided it. So it's just interesting because I think people that interact with it sometimes when they get to a point where, gosh, it's really thinking, it's understanding me. And, they may be having this personal conversation, or thinking that, it's this chatbot's talking to them. And it is, but it's really not, understanding. And I think I went on to explain how, it ChatGPT doesn't really even understand things in words the way that we do, because it's all based on tokens. So every word is broken up, um, or every word has a token sort of assignment to it. So some words are multiple tokens, where you'd have, maybe the word intelligent. I don't know for certain, but that might represent 2 tokens. So the word's broken up. And that's sort of what happens when you put a prompt in. ChatGPT takes your words and they become tokens to ChatGPT, and then they go and find the tokens that make sense and kind of fit with that puzzle piece. So it's interesting how it works, and I think sometimes looking at it from that perspective, it reminds you that it's a machine, it's an algorithm. It really can't think like humans. And although the output is sometimes it's incredible, it's mind blowing, it's beyond what we've ever had access to, it's still an algorithm at the end of the day.
I love I love it. I love it. That's such a great explanation, and I really thank you for that. And that's why, like I said, you're absolutely one of my favorite creators. So anytime your videos come up, I'm like, okay, what's Elise going to say today and share, because that really helps me. And so thank you so much for sharing that. But Elise, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about your upcoming project, or what you're currently working on. I know here says you're working on an AI company. So tell us a little bit about that, and what it is that you plan on providing the world, because this to me is really exciting to hear, what your current work is right now. And then I can just imagine, being able to do this and then just really getting out there. So tell us a little bit more about this venture.
Okay. So this really, what I have wanted to do is create a tool that is geared towards students and will help them with their writing, but not in a traditional sense of just, like we said, go write a 5-paragraph essay. It is a tool that will help them in terms of, I mean, it would be built on, it is being built on the Chat GPT API, or the GPT API. And so it will be kind of tapping into the Chat GPT brain, but having, my own interface, and providing the tools to come up with, I guess, the essay material or the content. But also, it isn't just that, it is also going to have modules and a focus on how to develop those skills that we kind of talked about are the end game, right? As far as the critical thinking and how you would develop those without just, kind of wrote, essay on kind of similar topics that students have always done. So without going into a whole lot of detail, it's really going to be a tool that will focus on helping students kind of do their assignments and ethically build upon that, but also with a focus on the how to get there, with the use of an AI tool that will, kind of fit into that academic integrity box and be allowed, um, and also require them to think. So I'm hoping that that's, something that could bridge that Chat GPT, and be a tool that would be able to be adopted by education, and have people be comfortable with that.
That's great. And I love that, finding a need and creating a solution. And I absolutely love that. And the way that you described it, is the step by step. And a lot of times, getting to those, solutions there as far as the writing is concerned, oftentimes, what I find as educators, we have kind of gotten away from explaining the why we do things. It's always like, why? Well, because that's the way it's always been done. And there's no explanation. But at least, building up, why did we do this? Oh, because of this. And you're building up and building up, and of course working on that writing skill, which is great. And so what is the name of the tool that you have given it?
Well, I don't have a specific name. So the company
Oh,
is the RAM.ai, and I don't have like a specific, tool that it a name for it at this point.
okay.
But the plan that we have is to launch by August, and that would hopefully be kind of around the time people are going back to school. So we've got a few months, and some of that information will probably come out somewhere around July. But the launch is planned for mid-August.
That is amazing. At least I don't know how you do it, from your work at UNT, then of course to your consulting work, of course being a mom and being a content creator and now creating this. Also, I don't know how you do it, but I just thank you for what you're doing because again, it really helps educators like myself and many other educators out there, and not just in the education field, but of course in the business side of things as well. So just continue doing what you're doing. Absolutely love your content. I appreciate all of your shares because every single time I take a little knowledge nugget that you share and then sprinkle it onto what I'm already doing. And it really helps me out too, as well. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for this great conversation. And I'm just, really excited again, like I said, I'm a huge fan and it's always, for me, it's a blessing to be able to speak to somebody that is doing some great things in our space or in any of the spaces that I follow. So thank you. It's been an honor to have you here and chat with you.
Thank
But
you.
before we go, Elise, I always love to end the show with the following three questions. And I hope I'm not surprising you with these because sometimes people are like shocked, but we'll just keep it simple. And so the first question that I always ask, and in this case, since we are talking a little bit more about AI, as we know, kryptonite was something that weakened Superman, and kind of debilitated him. So at this point in time, with your experience from December on with generative AI technologies, what would you say is your current AI kryptonite?
I would say I think it became evident when I tried to install Auto GPT. I don't know if you saw that video,
Yes.
but I don't have a programming background. And although I've been kind of involved in AI for a couple of years, there's very specific knowledge, and I think and not having some of those technical skills and kind of needing to figure certain things out can be challenging. And so I experienced that firsthand where I, tried to get Auto GPT installed, and it's a lot of coding and well, ChatGPT helped me with the coding piece, but even then, there's just basic fundamental things that programmers and developers would know, and you don't know. And I think that comes into play too a lot with just understanding kind of the AI detection technology and trying to kind of figure some of these other aspects out and having conversations with people that are developers. So for me, I've had to learn a lot in a short amount of time, and I feel like it's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of that. So I would say that's probably my biggest challenge, that and time right now. Even with all the tools I have, I don't seem to have enough time to get everything done. So those are the two things.
Excellent. Well, great answer. And to be honest with you, that was one of the videos too as well. And I'm glad that you brought that up and highlighting that. That's still that importance of those technical skills and the coding and so on. Because I know you mentioned it took maybe about 3 hours or something like that, for you to kind of get it
At
on there
least.
onto your computer.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I got it
No.
on my computer, but it isn't even actually functioning properly.
Ah,
So
I see.
there's that whole other element as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. My next question to you, Elise, is if you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
I would say embrace the journey would be I think that's always a good reminder, not just in sort of your AI world or work, but just in life. Sometimes if you just pause and maybe remember to be present and mindful, and I'm usually going like 100 miles an hour and kind of need that reminder of just appreciating where I am today and embracing the journey. So I think it's something I try to live by and to sort of slow down and enjoy the ride.
Excellent. Great billboard. Definitely agree with you on that. And the last question, Elise, let's add just something else to your plate. So on top of what you're doing as a professor, being a content creator, being a mom, being an entrepreneur here also as well, like building up your platform here. On top of that, let's say that you now added the Elise Victor podcast, and I had the honor of being your first guest on the show. What might be one question you like to ask me?
I guess I would want to know from your perspectives. I know you've talked with a lot of educators. What do you think the the most the biggest challenge is as far as adoption of AI tools for them at this point? And I would say
Yeah.
focus if you would know more on the K through 12. I'm very curious.
Yeah, and the through 12, it's just really just that fear of something new. What happens, and again, after COVID and even before COVID, it's number one. Before COVID, it was that being hesitant in using technology, not embracing it. It's just like, hey, this is the way we've always done it. This is what we're going to stick to. After COVID, or once we locked down, it's like everybody just they thrust technology in teachers' faces, and they had to adjust immediately, adapt to the situation. For students, I think it was a little bit easier since they are more familiar with computers, video games, the cell phone devices, and so on. So for them, maybe the transition wasn't as difficult, but for teachers, it really was. Coming back to school, brick and mortar, we saw that technology being pushed back again, back into the corner. And I think it was just a lot of trauma, a lot of trauma for that fear that now they associate that technology, those Chromebooks, those iPads, they just associate it with a really, I guess, difficult time in their education career. Now, slowly, they're embracing the technology. Many are still a little hesitant, but the fact that our state testing has changed to be computer only, teachers have to embrace that technology. So for something like this to get added on, we're always going to see those pocket of innovators that are going to embrace it and see what they can do with it, because for the efficiency aspect of it, like we talked about,
Mhm.
for a lot of educators, being able to take a currently built lesson plan that they have used and execute a command to I guess, implement supports for students that may need additional supports in a way that in one click and in 30 seconds, you get some of those suggestions that the teachers might otherwise take a long time, like maybe 30 minutes to write out. Now you have a list of things that you can do, and then the teacher can just curate and see, okay, this works, this doesn't, and so on, because they know their students. So for them, it's just really the initial shock and fear, and especially for writing teachers. But once they become familiar and accustomed and saying, hey, this is going to save me time, I think they're a little bit more accepting. What happens with teachers, like you mentioned in the earlier segment, is we're so used to seeing the algorithms working out of sight. There's platforms that we've always put kids on that'll measure where their skills are, close the gaps, and it'll create a pathway for them. But like you mentioned, now that the tech was so front facing and right here, and we're seeing it in action, that was that initial shock. But I think that that's kind of waning down now. And there's platforms out there like CurryPod, that is an AI tool where a teacher can type in, I want to create a lesson on water cycle, and it'll create the slides, it'll create questions, it'll create pretty much your whole presentation that you can just go tweak and edit rather than create from scratch. So
Right.
I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that in education, and it's just going to become like, hey, like this fear, like what fear? Hey, we're getting our time back. They're going to embrace that, and it's something that it's going to become day to day, I think. So it just takes a little while for some places to do that adopting than others, but eventually we will get there. So that's really my perspective and my thought process on what we're seeing here in the K-12 space.
Great. Well,
Great
thank you.
question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Elise, it's like I mentioned before, and again, I'll mention it again. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you here on the conversation, or here on the podcast, and having this amazing conversation, as I've taken so much from you today, as far as knowledge. And I know that our audience members also as well have taken in so much that you had to share. So audience members, thank you so much for joining us today. Those of you that are going to be catching this on the replay, please make sure that you stop by our website at myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 194 amazing episodes with educators and creators. that you can go ahead and grab some knowledge from, sprinkle it onto what you are already doing great. And please make sure that you stop by our store if you want to support our mission of connecting educators and creators one show at a time. Please make sure check out our merch. We know summer conference season is around the corner, so pick yourself up a cap. We've got some shirts, or get ready for that winter conference season because we've got some great sweaters too as well. And as you know, all of your contributions go back into our mission, go back into our show, so we can continue doing what we do, which is bringing you some amazing content that you can just really just soak in. And again, just add some more additional tools to your teacher tool belt and just be part of some amazing conversations that are being had in our education landscape. So please make sure that you give us a like, share, and a follow. That way, all the algorithms can go ahead and put us into your podcast listeners, into your videos, and so on. But as always, my friends, thank you so much, as always, for your support. Thank you always. And my friends, don't forget, until next time, stay techie.